Good morning. Welcome to the Friday morning West Coast version of the Space Show. I'm your host, David Livingston. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and we appreciate your being here. We have what I think is going to be a great program. Two guests. So first of all, Frank White is back with us. He has been with us on the Space Show since the forming of the Space Show because I read his book, The Overview Effect, and it's in my doctoral dissertation multiple places, long before the space show was even a dream or in anyone's consciousness. So Frank and the space show have a very, very long relationship, and rightly deserved. And Pablo Moncada, who is with us, and he's co-founder of a company, MoonDAO, DAO, which I will ask him to explain. And MoonDAO has lots of different projects on kind of diversifying funding for space accidents, access, not accidents, we hope. And Frank is one of those projects because he wants to experience the overview effect for himself, and I don't blame him. So, couple of quick announcements. Uh, our Sunday show coming up with Dr. Joel Sercel has a slight modification because his attorneys have put the kibosh on him talking about his asteroid retrieval program. But Joel's a smart guy, and we're going to brainstorm with him on some of the topics we talk about on the space show, like data centers and mass drivers on the moon and the newly revised NASA plan to go to the moon and much more, plus what TransAstra as a company is all about. And Jason Andrews is back on the show Tuesday. And then Friday, the former editor of Astronomy magazine, David Eicher, is making an appearance on the show. So that's what we have coming up, everybody. Pablo, why don't you lead us off in our discussion? Introduce us to MoonDAO, because as I said, I don't think most space show people are familiar with it or know about it, or your plans to sort of diversify and create new ways of funding space access. What do you mean by that? And welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'm excited to be here and to share a little bit about the work that we're doing with Frank and also explain a little bit about MoonDAO because it is kind of an unorthodox concept. What there's a few things to explain. Maybe the best place to start is the motivation around why you'd want to do anything as quote unquote a DAO and what that even means, because it means a lot of different things to different people, and some people might not even be aware of the concept yet. So a DAO stands for a decentralized autonomous organization, which is kind of a fancy way of just saying that it runs on top of these smart contracts. And that's a fancy way of saying that it's basically people online that write up code and then they agree to some outcomes based off of different if then statements, like very kind of simple programs. But they aren't the arbiter of those contracts is not a nation or a third party. It's just on chain. It's code. So this allows for kind of new mediums of collaboration that before weren't really possible. So two people from different parts of the world can interact with one another and then can reliably know that, hey, if I do this work for you, I will get paid this amount. And you can do interesting things like stream amounts of payments. You can have different outcomes based on, for example, how much money is raised for an initiative. You can have people collaborating on treasuries where they sign transactions and they send payments to one another. You can have governance, so you have a lot of people voting on things, and then based on the outcomes of that vote, certain things happen on chain. So you can do a lot of really interesting things that previously weren't possible even just 5, 10 years ago. So this idea seemed to me as like something that was very interesting, especially when it comes to coordinating groups of people um, that have been having trouble coordinating. Maybe you're relying on a government or something like that to pull money and then allocate it effectively. But it's the great thing about these tools too is that they're very transparent, so you can see all of the transactions that are happening. So there's a lot of really cool things with this medium. And so I got really interested in the medium itself, and then with a bunch of people online, we organized first a crowd raise to buy the U.S. Constitution, which was kind of a it was a crazy thing, but it was going up for bid at Sotheby's. It was one of the original prints of the U.S. Constitution, and so it was a bunch of people online that decided, hey, this shouldn't be in private hands anymore. We should put together a crowd raise and then bring it back into the hands of the people. And I think it was kind of a watershed moment for this type of technology because it showed its capacity for raising money online. So within 1 week, $47 million were raised, which is really really wild. Even for anyone involved, we didn't really expect it. So these tools can move really really quickly at the speed of the internet, and then we decided, hey, well, what's another thing that only millionaires and billionaires can
Whoa, whoa,
do?
whoa, whoa, wait a minute. Who bought the U.S. Constitution and what did it go for? Do you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we didn't know who we were up against in the bid. So within 1 week, we knew when the bid was going to be. We raised $47 million, and then we didn't know who we were bidding against. It was just telephones via Sotheby's, and the person that we were bidding against was Ken Griffin, who's the hedge fund founder of Citadel.
Uh-huh.
Um, and he was able to outbid us actually. So we lost that one. And then the great thing about these tools too is that there's a deterministic refund process. So everyone got refunded. The median contribution was like $200. So it was, over 10,000 people contributed online.
So this is all Bitcoin. You're not doing anything in a currency, in a national currency. Is that correct?
Nothing's occurring in a national currency. In this particular case, it was Ethereum, which is it's another one of these digital
Uh-huh.
assets. Yeah.
Amazing. I
Hmm.
didn't even know it was up for sale. But was he allowed to buy it? I mean, do you know what he did with it?
Yeah, he bought it, and then I think now it's in a museum, but he owns it. So
So he loaned
and
it to a museum.
it was the most expensive document that's ever been purchased. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What has it done for space?
Well, so I guess the clearest impact that it's had so far on space is I took that same model for the Constitution and then tried to apply it for space. So we used a lot of the same mechanisms in order to raise funds to send people to space, and then we were able to send two people to space. But the long tail kind of interesting thing I think for me isn't the capacity to just raise money, but then also how you coordinate around that. So we have a governance model where we funded now over 80 projects that are proposed from people in the community and then voted on by people in the community, and anyone can participate from any part of the world. So yeah, it's a new medium, it's a new way of coordinating with people online, and we don't really know where it's going to go yet. It's just kind of starting. But
I,
it's been pretty fun.
so
So
probably the only company you could send the two people to space with was Blue Origin. So do you get a firm quote from them that says we'll do it for X dollars, whatever that may be, and then you know what you have to go out and raise? Because Blue doesn't publish their prices or even the process to get a ticket on it. So how did you get that firmed up?
yeah, so we raised the money kind of not knowing exactly what the price was going to be. We had a ballpark estimate. We thought, okay, it's probably around this much. If it doesn't work, we'll do the refund.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then we got on the phone with Blue and were able to negotiate a price for two seats. We originally just wanted to get one, but we had enough for two. So
Can you tell us what that price was?
I can't comment on it. No. Yeah.
So that's not transparent then on your what you're paying for the service is not transparent.
Yeah, the transactions on chain are transparent. Uh, so that was an interesting way to interface with them because we told them, hey, we're gonna pay you guys, but it's coming from our treasury, and so they were okay with that. But I can't speak about the prices. Yeah.
I just have to say too, that's not MoonDAO's choice. That was Blue Origin's choice. They are very,
Tight-lipped.
they're very tight-lipped and you have to sign an NDA and so on, and you have to adhere to it. So yeah, that's that's really the carriers. And what we're doing now is carrier independent once again.
So in working to send Frank to space, um, do you don't have an identified carrier yet because Blue is sort of out of business for the time being at least. So how do you present that to your potential donors or investors?
Yeah. So we did a lot of kind of homework before this raise. We reached out to a bunch of different carriers, a bunch of different space companies, got an idea of their timelines, their costs, their plans. And then we said, great, okay. So we've got kind of a little database internally of all these timelines, all these prices, everything from stratospheric balloons to suborbital to even orbital. We've even talked about a lunar flight. It sounds pretty crazy, but SpaceX had previously already sold this with Starship. Obviously, we don't know what the timeline looks like with Starship, but they're openly selling these seats. So we've talked to a bunch of different companies, and we have an idea of what we could do with a different amount of money. So we have different milestones essentially, depending on how much we raise with this. But I think Frank is the most deserving person on planet Earth to go up and experience the overview effect. He has to go, and whether that's via stratospheric balloon or suborbital or multiple. I think because Frank also wants to understand the difference between each of these profiles and their impact that they have on the astronauts. So we'll see how it evolves. But yeah, so far we're at I think $150,000 almost. So we're kind of within striking distance of a few of these seats already. Yeah.
Amazing. Um, there's a cultural issue on the lunar side, and I just wonder if you address it or just dismiss it. But Frank knows from attending ISDC meetings, I'm not sure whether he ever was in any of the tracks, but over the past several years, the Navajo Nation has been really opposed to doing anything with with the moon because they claim almost everything in the sky is their, cultural religion. And I know it because I have a contract for DNA and ashes to be buried on the moon with Celestis, and all of that is in jeopardy because of the uh, issues being raised and successfully being raised, I might add, which to me is very disappointing by the Navajo Nation and others that have joined with them. Uh, so I'm wondering how do you dismiss things like that in your plans? Because you said you even mentioned a lunar mission. Do you just kind of ignore these potential stumbling blocks, or do you take it into consideration, or do you just consider it sort of not real yet?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm curious also what Frank thinks, but at least with this lunar mission, it's a flyby, so nothing would be left on the moon. So I don't think the Navajo Nation would have an issue there necessarily, but I guess the broader concern about how different cultures react to the idea of the moon being developed or something like that is a really interesting one, and it's a political question. And I don't think I'm the right person to answer anything like that. But
I'm actually surprised at how much pressure is had with NASA to interfere with, say, the plans of Celestis and competitors about burial or something like that on the moon, and probably commercial development as well if we get closer to that. Doesn't seem to be stopping NASA from wanting a commercial lunar base on the moon. But
yeah.
I think I'm surprised that it has this much leg power. Frank, you must be aware of it, and I don't know if you ever heard any of the Navajo presentations at ISDC, but I'd love to pick your brain on it for a minute. Do you have any thoughts on these kinds of cultural issues about the moon or maybe anything else in space?
Well, I think we're going to have to respect the cultural imperatives that different people bring to space exploration. And I don't really have an answer for the Navajo Nation, but I have great respect for indigenous people and their views of the cosmos. So I would want to listen very carefully. Um, and also, I would say that this conflict got me involved in the idea of outer space mediation. And it's something I'm working on is to create uh, a capability to deal with these kind of questions. Because I don't think, I don't think there's an argument that can be won. I think perhaps there's a mediation that could be developed here. I also want to say, I haven't, this is just me in terms of my knowledge. I've heard the arguments against human remains on the moon. I really haven't heard arguments about people on the moon from the Navajo Nation. So I think that's going to be a very fundamental issue because um, there's a real imperative to expand off world. There is a need to do it. There's a lot of there are cultures that are into exploration, and I think their cultural imperatives have to be acknowledged as well. The one thing I would say, and I'm co-founder of the Human Space Program and president of it, um, we are absolutely opposed to bringing colonization mentality off world. We don't want to repeat mistakes of the past. The whole idea of space for all is, I think, a major idea of the space community, and it's a great idea. But then when we have conflicts like this, we really have to sort of dig into them and work it out.
I know from when I started the space show, I had listeners, I think this was also probably in my dissertation, that condemned the mentality of developing space colonies, and they much more preferred let's have settlements because settlements didn't carry with it the baggage of control of people
Mhm.
that might be negative control. So I know that discussion and argument is deeper than semantics. So on the space show, we have tried over the years to work with settlements, but colonies persist by a lot of different groups and a lot of different people.
Can you explain the difference between the word colony and settlement and community and what it connotes?
Well, I could do it from my perspective, but I prefer Frank or Pablo doing it.
Well, colony actually is a perfectly okay word, except for its historical meaning. So, colony has to do with an originating system sending out a colonizing system, and it's essentially an exploitative uh, mission, if you will. So, how did the United States start? It wasn't 13 states, it was 13 colonies. And essentially, we know the history of that, the conflict with indigenous people that resulted from that. So it's an attitude. Um, I'm actually somewhat concerned about settlement because what happened in the United States is we started with colonies, and then as we moved west, we had settlements, and the settlements reproduced some of the same exploitative mentality as the colonies. So to me, communities is the best word. Community means people who live and work together in a positive way. The other thing I would say is, even if you totally disagree with me and you think that's just semantics, for many people on this planet, the word colony is not inclusive. I heard actually, in my book, The Cosmo Hypothesis, I quote a person who is from India originally, who pointed out colony is a perfectly fine word. It has meaning in biology and in other ways. But for those of us who come from India, it's not a very positive word. It makes us not very interested in space exploration. So I think you have to think about the impact of words on other people when you use these kind of terms.
But independent of the word, if we go to the moon or Mars and set up a a civilization, we're going to do the same thing, no matter what we call it. We're going to occupy the space. We're going to use the resources. We're going to exploit what's there to make it easier to live there, right?
Mhm. Yeah. I come in there and say the question really comes in is what is a space nation and what is the autonomy of space nations in relationship to nations on Earth?
So from my perspective, Dallas and others, if you start out with the terminology of colony or even settlement, because as we move through the West, the government controlling the colony soon became corporations controlling mining towns. They were different things like that. There were groups that would control it. And we had company towns and on and on and on. If you start out with that mindset, I think it's much harder to move to some kind of a more equal, open relationship community. And if the goal is to, using Mars for example, for Mars at some point to be independent of Earth, maybe even economically independent of Earth. I mean, who knows? But um, I I think it's easier to evolve there if your mindset has never been one of someone controlling you uh, for uh, maybe their own benefit or maybe for your own good. So yeah, the differences are subtle, and a lot depends on who the people are and the culture at the time, and all sorts of issues like that. Um, but I was sensitized to it. I used settlement in my dissertation, and I mostly used it on the space show. The community terminology that Frank is introducing is kind of new to me and does make sense to me because it portrays a long-term view where the people going to Mars or wherever are not going to be subjects of Earth, and if they need Earth for survival or something, uh, they should still be able to do it without having some kind of control or subjugation. But that's just me, and I know lots and lots of people differ from that. AJ is from India. You want to comment, AJ?
Yes, I wanted to first say that the word colony sort of delineates control by some other country for that particular place. It has. I mean, India, Pakistan, Kenya, all of those were colonies, but they were all controlled by Britain. So that kind of uh, denotation is can be problematic for some people. In terms of settlement, I think that's probably a less problematic word because settlement can be, um, I guess, you know, consisting of people from different countries, different places, especially the lunar base that they are talking about as a base is apparently going to be made up of people from different countries and even the signers of the Artemis Accords who will come to the surface instead of at NRHO or Gateway. So all of those kinds of things makes me feel that the word colony probably is much more problematic, and settlement is probably acceptable. But there is a difference between settlement and colony in this way, Dallas.
Pablo, you wanted to jump back in and just jump in. You don't need to raise your hand or anything.
Sure. Yeah. Just yeah. I guess I think that the sort of semantics around it it is interesting because it does give us kind of a long-term kind of vector around like what sort of what are the mentality of the people that are going there initially. And I think I want to say that I think one of the most interesting outcomes of the sort of exploration of the New World was the development of new types of governance models. And obviously, we live, or I don't know if everyone here lives in the United States, but the kind of renaissance of thinking about governance and how we'd like to be governed, that had an impact not just in the United States, but then in the rest of the world. So I think that like the way that we approach governance on the moon will be really important because it'll also be kind of a rethinking of governance potentially from first principles because it's new people going there. There aren't people there right now, and then I think it could serve as a model that might impact governance on Earth as well. So I think these things are very interesting and important. But then I think also you don't get the governance and independence if you're not self-sustaining, and that's another question. I don't know if the moon could ever become entirely self-sustaining. Can you have the food systems there? Can you have everything that you need right there in situ? That's probably going to take a very, very long time. So I think it'll take a while to actually develop any of these ideas.
That's right. Yeah.
Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple of points. First of all, I've learned a lot about MoonDAO since they honored me with their backing for a spaceflight. And as David mentioned, this would be the first flight, I hope, in a long-term project to compare how the different carriers and the different experiences produce the overview effect. But right now, we've got our hands full with one flight. But I've learned a lot about MoonDAO, and I've said this before. I think MoonDAO has a space program. MoonDAO has flown 2 people, which is more than 150 countries have flown. MoonDAO has done 80 space-related projects that don't have anything to do with flying people. They're research projects. And it's pretty much democratically done. Any one of you, Pablo, correct me if I'm wrong. Could anybody here propose a project?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
It's open to anyone. Yeah.
So people propose projects, they're voted on. I realized one of my other ambitions, other than becoming an astronaut, I'm a senator of MoonDAO. It's a short-term thing. It's only because I proposed something in the past and I got it funded. So then I have to be a senator, which means I have to vote on the new projects. But what am I saying? It's democratic, and I like that a lot. So, that's one thing I want to say. The other thing, going back to what Dallas said, aren't we going to do what we did before? Well, I don't know. When I first started doing research on the overview effect, it's a surprise to people. I did not start with astronauts. The idea of the overview effect was about people living in an O'Neill community or on the moon. And incidentally, Gerard K. O'Neill, one of my heroes, he used the word colony back in the day. It's a recent thing that we've stopped using it. But my question was, will people living permanently off world and seeing the image you see behind me, will they have a different attitude toward Earth and space than we do? They'll see the Earth as a whole system, everything connected, no borders, no boundaries. They'll see everything from the point of view of a different perspective. Will they behave differently? So I don't know the answer to that once we're on the moon or in an O'Neill community, but there will have to be exploitation, not of people, but of resources. But what I'm calling for really is a balance of exploitation and exploration. Can we put the two together this time? We had a great period of exploration back in the past, but it's become tainted by exploitation. Can we do both and do it responsibly?
Pablo, is there a timeline for, say, Frank's project? Does it expire? Is it endless? How do you look at it in terms of a timeline and being able to participate or not participate?
Yeah, so the way that we've structured this initiative with Frank is we have now 30 days, one month left to raise funds for the mission. And if we don't hit our minimum goal, our minimum goal is that Frank goes to space, that we find a viable carrier that can work for that price point on a timeline that makes sense, then we'll refund the funds. So yeah, we've time bound it. It's not forever, because I think that it helps to have something concrete that just says, okay, we're doing it or not after this calendar day. So
I suppose your mission for Frank is round trip, correct?
we want Frank to come back. Yeah, I think so. I think we could vote on it. Maybe we can have a MoonDAO vote.
Did you already send two people up and on New Shepard already? So that
Yeah.
okay. And so you're looking for, I guess the only other carrier is it Virgin Galactic? Or
We're suborbital right now. I believe that they're the only. And I think it's also an important note that we haven't mentioned yet is we are aiming for 2 seats because we'd like for someone to fly alongside Frank. We think that this would have more people participate. So by funding the campaign, if you fund it for more than $100, then you get a free citizenship alongside that, and then any citizen can be part of a competition that we've put together to fly alongside Frank. So we'd like for it to be 2 people, similar to how we did the first fundraiser. Just because it's more fun, more people get to participate, and I think there's maybe a selfish aspect of I get to go as well with
Yeah.
Frank. So
that'd be cool.
This is
I had a
for
question for Frank. So Frank, back to the settlement versus colony thing. In the overview effect, you said that war and space exploration may be mutually exclusive. Because if one occurs on a massive scale, the other probably will not, is one of the quotes I really liked in your book. And but in terms of that benefit of space exploration, that it distracts from war, essentially on Earth, do you feel like really we ought to be focusing for more of a nationalistically driven effort to settle another planet, and which really means colonize in my definition. Because when you're trying to settle it, I think the word settled implies that, a small family gets up and finds a place in some land that we already own. It's not contested land. It's just you're going to set up a little homestead. Whereas colonize seems to me evoke a more of a national. We're going to go over and take this land and have a plan for infrastructure and a plan to have, encourage lots of people to settle it. But it's because it's nationally driven, it's distracting from potentially war and other types of expansionist desires. So in that sense, do you believe in colonization? And what was your thoughts on that whole, how it would work, how it would benefit society or benefit the planet?
Yeah. I don't think I saw national space programs as distracting from war. What I really had in mind, and don't forget, I wrote that in 1986, a long time ago. What I had in mind, if any of you have ever read The Moral Equivalent of War by William James, he was a psychologist at Harvard, and I believe he wrote this before World War I. But he laid out he's a psychologist who laid out the psychological drivers of war and the fact that war brought people together, brought out really great energy and innovation, and people who had been in military conflict had a certain, I don't know, a certain spirit about them that couldn't be obtained in civilian life. He said we need a moral equivalent of war. And then John F. Kennedy, in his famous 1962 Rice speech, talked about space as a place where there was no conflict, there was no necessity to compete. And he actually, many people don't know this, but he wanted Apollo to be a joint US-Soviet mission. I don't know how many of you know that, but that's what he wanted. And he even wanted it to be a multinational mission for the same reasons. So what's happened since I wrote that is I feel that we're at an inflection point, because I don't really see us right now going out there as a united planet. I see it as a competition between nations. And I think, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, we missed a great opportunity to make space a multinational cooperative venture. We missed it. And I feel like we're missing it again. We really are. I I I see it happening in the language that we're using right now about beating the Chinese to the moon. The United States already beat the Chinese to the moon in 1969. I'm not sure why we have to beat them again, if you know what I'm saying. It may seem like a totally crazy idea that the United States and China could go to the moon together instead. But that's exactly what Kennedy was proposing at a time when the Soviet Union was viewed as our existential enemy. So I think we're at a point of making choices, and right now I think the choice is more nationalistic, and it's really, Phil, it's not fitting into my vision. And I'm working as hard as I can, and the human space program, we're working as hard as we can on emphasizing cooperation in outer space.
I'd like to point out, I was watching just before this show, I think it was a speech by Elon Musk, which is probably yesterday afternoon, and he's specifically talking about putting basically SpaceX Tesla on the moon and producing AI centers to be launched by rail into space to quote unquote meet this huge demand for artificial intelligence centers, which begs the question, are we talking about nations competing or corporations competing?
You got me there, Marshall. We, the nature of a corporation is to compete. I mean, really,
Mm-hmm.
companies do cooperate. I mean, Microsoft and OpenAI cooperated for a long time. They're going through a breakup now, but you're making a great point. And I think that ultimately, again, we're going to look for balance between exploitation and exploration, but competition and cooperation as well. Incidentally, I see Elon's idea as a descendant of a Gerard K. O'Neill idea. He talked about mining the moon and
Mm-hmm.
using mass drivers to send material out to build space colonies or communities. And I also, one other thing I would say, O'Neill had the idea that his project was environmental as well as space, because he felt if we could move industry off the earth, it would be good for the earth because we were being pretty overwhelming to our planet's carrying capacity. In general, I support the idea of data centers off world because building these data centers and the energy demand they're going to have on the earth is going to be incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, let's see if that's feasible.
I also read yesterday afternoon a piece about Meta putting in a huge AI center in Northwest Louisiana, $27 billion. And I'm sitting here going, okay, where are they getting electricity for all this? And Elon this morning I saw was basically saying we have to go to space because we can't make that much power in the
Right.
United States. And you have problems of the paperwork just to get a regular natural gas fired plant is like 5 years.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, a nuclear power plant,
Mm.
small nuclear reactors. I figure you could easily double that, which means we can't go anywhere for 10 years.
Yeah.
And it Elon was making sense because if you move it off planet, you get rid of paperwork. Isn't that an interesting thought?
You've not been listening to recent shows. You maybe get rid of paperwork. You're making some pretty big unfounded assumptions because it would
Yeah.
depend on who your government is, what you want to do, what they've decided to regulate, not regulate what the UN may do, what other countries may do. It may not be as easy and regulatory free as the assumptions are today to do it, and you just don't know. I mean, I would hope that they would be easier and freer and less costly to deal with, but without any information on any of the factors going into such an analysis, I don't see how you can, with a straight face, say it's going to be a lot easier and a lot cheaper than Northwest Louisiana. I,
I
Well,
have to I would have to agree with that, and I think that just as a joke, one way to get rid of all that paperwork that we are talking about is just to fire it up in the space. That's the only way. You can't really. I think that this idea of ignoring uh, advanced nuclear reactors or generation 4 reactors for all these data centers is just wrong. It's just much easier, I mean, much cheaper and possible to do this on Earth, where it can be controlled by individual countries instead of relying on some country which just put up the data centers up there. It's just not going to, not going to
Mhm.
fly.
Here, let's see what Pablo has to say. He's had his hand up for eons.
Oh, sorry. I didn't want to disrupt this is a great topic. So, but I just wanted to say something about what Frank was talking about earlier between the sort of competition between China and the United States, which is so MoonDAO was actually when we first tried to send someone to space, we had an American, it was their first person, and the second who actually won the competition was Chinese. And they were going to fly with Blue Origin. Blue Origin was okay with it. It was going to be the first Chinese national to ever really participate in the U.S. space program at large. I guess if you include these private companies, they were okay with it. However, it got blocked by the United States government. They wouldn't allow a Chinese national to fly. So I guess this is to say that these companies are subject to the national policies. So the companies are yeah, they're competing, but of course they're always subordinate to the nation. But I really like, Frank, what you said about the sort of like the benefits of war, in that you unite people towards a common mission, and you have a lot of people that are giving their all, that spirit of sort of the combat. But then how do you channel that productively? And I think Frank is totally right that space is a domain where you can channel those same energies. But how do you do it within the framework of sort of a collaborative competition? So I look at things like the Olympics. It's an international competition, but you're collaborating on the rule sets. You collaborate on how people win, and you avoid outcomes of violence or something like that. But you still have these energies kind of go head to head, and I think that's exactly the type of energy that we want to bring towards the quote unquote space race. We collaborate on the sort of rules of the game, but then we compete full force, because otherwise we're just talking about it. We're just doing policy stuff, and the doers just kind of get the waters get muddied so much. There's so much gray area that you can't really do anything. I think you need the sort of like top cover from a nation or something to say, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to move forward. And I think what Jared Isaacman is doing is incredible. Is he's
Yeah.
giving that sort of like leadership and saying, yeah, we're moving forward. We're gonna build a base. And I think that's amazing. So lots of thoughts there, but and then the Elon stuff with the mass drivers on the moon and the AI data centers. I mean, there's so much to talk about right now. It's really incredible. We're really in the golden age of space. It's
Hey,
cool.
Frank, have you given thought to what you're going to do on your space flight when you get to the altitude where you have the overview effect? Like, are you going to hold a group encounter meeting for the crew to experience the overview effect under your master leadership, or uh, how are you going to note it, or have you given any thought to this monumental thing with the originator of the overview concept?
I think about it all the time, David. Uh, you know, one of the things I've learned from talking to people, and it started with Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo astronaut, one of the things I've learned is that openness to the experience is the key, right? Um, Edgar Mitchell said that he felt like among his colleagues, the difference between an aha experience and a more mundane experience of spaceflight was openness to it. And I think that's really true. And the challenge is this: the early astronauts, they didn't have a name for this experience. This experience was happening for like 25 years before I wrote my book. And the NASA astronauts, they weren't going to have an experience, they were going to beat the Russians, competing. Now there's a name for it. Now people are going for the experience. And it's one of those contradictions where you say, David, you got to be open to it. Be open. Immediately, it's like, don't think of a pink elephant. Um, it's almost impossible. So I think about it because I've been thinking about the overview effect for 40 years, and I know that the best thing to do is to not have any expectations, but I'm not quite sure how to escape my own reality. One thing I will tell you, I've thought about a lot in practical terms. Um, a lot of thought has been given once you're on a commercial flight. Do you unbuckle and experience weightlessness, or do you just loosen the buckles and look out the window? That's a very practical question because you only have 3 or 4 minutes and you can get turned around and upside down and disoriented if you're weightless. And then you've got to get back in your seat on time. And I think I'm not going to unbuckle. I've thought about that a lot. Also, I interviewed Gretchen Green, who went on Blue Origin, and her group, her crew, made the decision not to have a group photo because they'd have to unbuckle, they'd have to get together and weightlessness and all of that. They were all going to focus on the view. So, yeah, I've thought about it a lot. And I'm working with Christina Starr, who's a colleague of mine, on creating a training program for commercial astronauts to get the most out of the experience. And I'm the guinea pig. I, I'm keeping a diary. I'm going to report on everything that happens, and we will see how it goes. But I have thought about it a lot, and I wish I could stop thinking about it because I think that's the best way to go.
Hey, Frank, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Um, I saw on MoonDAO's website that you're planning on taking a AI chatbot with you,
God, thank you.
and yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, yeah. Gosh, thank you for that. I meant to mention that, David. Well, I had this concept flying cross country, and it's ironic. The whole idea of the overview effect came when I was flying cross country. And then on a recent flight in August of 2025, I wondered, could an AI experience the overview effect? Actually, I had thought about it at a conference as a new Turing test. That's what happened. On that cross country flight, I decided to talk to GPT-5 and find out. So I asked GPT-5, do you think you could experience the overview effect? And GPT-5 said, well, I can't experience it like you because I don't have eyes and I don't have a body. But maybe I could create a protocol by which I could experience it. And GPT-5 created a protocol which involved monitoring its own language for planetary ideas versus nationalistic ideas, and exposing itself to astronaut quotes. And it went through the whole process and it came out the other end and said, I have experienced the overview effect. And my friends have pointed out that AIs like to please humans. And did I really think GPT-5 was going to say, no, nothing happened? Well, anyway, this led me to the idea of somehow with meta glasses or some other methodology, could we take AI on the flight and check it out on a real flight? And I think we're going to try to do that. And people are really interested in that. I think it has a certain societal importance because I feel like the overview effect is a positive value system. And I think we want artificial intelligence to have positive values. And so we're going to give it a shot.
I wonder if the overview effect is actually more than just the visual effect. Like, could it be that, the feeling of weightlessness, the feeling that you're like not in the cradle of anything anymore. But yet, because you're up there for long enough, it's more than just an airline flight. You're kind of have some serenity around it as well. I wonder if all these physiological effects feed into the overall overview effect. And if in order to really truly experience it, you might need to behave more like an actual astronaut would have behaved on a real mission.
I really agree with you in the sense that I think, and that's one of the reasons I might unbuckle, if I can figure out how to do that effectively. But we know weightlessness affects every organ of the body, and the brain is an organ. It's a physical thing. I can't believe it's not contributing to the experience in a big way. And I know when astronauts constantly talk about the colors, the bluest of blue, the brownest of brown, and there is something, kind of a heightened awareness that they have of the Earth when they're looking at the Earth. And when they look beyond the Earth, the blackest of black,
Mhm.
I think that's something to do with zero gravity and the brain. I really do.
If I may sort of add to that, um, the in taking the suborbital flights, at least the last 5-10 minutes before you reach zero velocity, you could still probably get the overview effect of watching the Earth and and all that, and also coming back. Whereas unbuckling and actual zero gravity would occur for 3-4 minutes at the end. So probably it might be a good idea to do both. So, you would be able to do 5-10 minutes before the velocity goes to zero and all that, and then unbuckle.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that kind of would that be correct for me to say that?
Yeah, I think you're right. That's really good advice. And I'd refer you, if you can find it on YouTube, Ron Rosano, who flew on Virgin, has a nice little video of his flight. And I think what you're talking about happened. I mean, you
Hmm.
can see him looking out the window as they go up, and then he did unbuckle. And I think he felt a lot of awe and wonder on the way up. And I think it became more intense as he floated around and looked down. So
Hmm.
you've given me a new idea, AJ. I think maybe I will unbuckle.
I'm very glad.
Marshall.
The other possibility I see
Oh,
here is that you discover that in the short time of a suborbital flight, you're too stressed and it's just too bewildering, and you don't get into the mental state where you experience the overview effect because it's just such a short flight. And I wouldn't be surprised if you interviewed many people who've done suborbital flights versus the people who've done orbital flights, if their overview effect is different, right? Like they is
Good,
more
good.
intense perhaps if you go up and stay in space for longer. So I'd be kind of curious to see like if you come back and form an opinion and share that, hey, this is I don't feel like I really had the overview effect properly. I want to go up for real into orbit and
Right.
change the dynamic of like what people want in space as a result.
Well, Phil, that's a really good question. And I kind of thought that would be true, but I've now interviewed, I think, maybe as many as 10 suborbital astronauts, and most of them had pretty profound experiences to
Yeah,
my surprise.
yeah,
Um, it really, I mean, the primary example of someone who I did not interview is William Shatner.
exactly. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
If you
Yeah,
saw him come out of the Blue Origin
yeah.
capsule, AJ,
He
his
was,
mind was
yeah,
blown.
blown, right? Yeah,
And
and
he
he said those things afterwards. That was the main thing that he saw, the blackness of the space and the effect, the overview effect.
yeah,
So I think that is correct. That you will be able to. I hope that you'll be able to get both of these things under your belt. No,
right.
or not under your belt, but without the belt.
Well, Yeah, Phil, I wish I could give you a copy of the fifth edition of the Overview Effect because that's going to have a lot of suborbital astronaut interviews, and you will be able to compare it to the NASA people for yourself. Um, the fifth edition's not out yet, but I'm processing these suborbital interviews, and they're pretty impressive. Now,
Mark?
I do think you're right. I haven't
Um,
come across anybody, but you could get so stressed out you wouldn't have any kind of experience.
Right.
Sorry, Marshall.
I'd like to ask kind of a philosophical question because I've kind of seen it in other people, and that I think it's best described as the first Homo sapien to climb to the top of a mountain and experience the universe in its whole, and coming back with a similar type experience. And in your interviews with many of these people, uh, do any of them map it back to just being human?
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. I hadn't really thought of it quite like that, but I think that what I've compared it with is the idea of Plato's cave. Do you know about Plato's cave? That's a philosophical concept, Marshall.
No, I'm not familiar with that one. No.
So Plato imagined that everybody lives in a cave. They're chained to the
Hmm.
floor. They're looking at a wall. There's a fire behind them, and there are figures making gestures on the wall, and that's their reality. One guy breaks out, he goes out, he sees the sun, he sees
Hmm.
the reality, and he comes back and attempts to describe it, and they think he's crazy.
Hmm.
You know, um, the astronauts are honored in our culture. They're not treated as crazy people, but I think the astronauts that I've talked to, including commercial astronauts, they just say there's no words for it. They can't describe it.
Hmm.
Uh, I think they become Homo spacians, really. Uh,
Hmm.
Mentally, at least, they become almost a different species because the, the, the thing about it that's really important is they see the truth.
Hmm. And
Ron Garan says we live a lie on the surface. That's what he got out of going.
Hmm.
mhm.
Truth is that we're floating through the vast universe on a organic spaceship, and
Yeah.
there's no lifeboat.
That is very similar to what some of my friends commented on after going up into the Rockies and spending a couple of days hiking, and you get this beautiful clear night. Then
Yeah.
all of a sudden you get the feeling, wait a minute, the nearest star is 4.5 light years away.
Yeah.
And that star over there is 15 light years away. And all of a sudden you feel very small, and the earth is very small. And as one guy put it, God has a sense of humor because he made us feel so important when we're not.
Well,
Frank,
yeah.
go ahead, and then I want to give you an observation and see what you think about it.
Well, I compare it to gravity. You know, you may think gravity is not real. You may feel like it's it's a myth, it's a hoax. Gravity's a hoax. It's not real. It's not real. Um, but try it. You'll find out gravity is real. And I think it's the same thing. The overview effect is real in the sense that it shows us the truth of our situation. We're not on a stable platform with the stars rotating above our head, even though that's our experience. We are on a moving planet that is moving at a very high rate of speed through the universe.
Mhm.
And as you pointed out, um, Avi Loeb at Harvard likes to say, we're not even the main actors in the play.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
So, over the years, I interviewed a lot of astronauts. When they're retired, it's almost
Yeah.
impossible to interview an active duty astronaut. Never interviewed any of the suborbital people yet. But surprisingly, quite a few of them, A, they say they've never heard of the overview effect, and B, they didn't have it. So I find that a little unusual that they would never have heard of it. But
Mm.
when I go back and look at their backgrounds and their interviews, these are pretty quantitative people. They're deep into astrophysics or really embedded deep into engineering, something that keeps them in their head the entire duration
Right.
of the trip, including the prep, including the debriefing. They don't get out of their head, Frank.
Mm.
And I know you touched on this where you said, you kind of have to be open to it. I think if you're a person that really is in your head all the time about everything in life, you could be a doctor, or an MD or a nurse, or if you're in your head, you block from all sorts of
Yeah.
sensorial, is that the right word, kind of
Yeah.
experiences that are open to you and perspectives that are open to you,
Yeah.
which maybe you ought to, go take some mushrooms or something. I don't know. But have you found that being so committed to or stuck in your head or your science or your beliefs, it blocks you from something
Yeah.
like the overview effect? Did you ever find anything like that?
Yeah. Well, I think to some extent, the astronauts who consent to being interviewed by me are open to talking about the overview effect.
Yeah.
There's a lot of self-selection there, confirmation bias, you might call it. But I think you're right. And I'd go back to what Mitchell said. Mitchell said something like, if you're not open to the experience, if you think you already know what's going to happen, you're not going to get new information that shifts your awareness a bit. And I think that you're exactly right, David. The way I talk about it and writing about it, I've said one person can go to church and they can feel that they experience God. Another person can go to church and say, oh, look at that person over there. He thinks he's a Christian, but he's really a hypocrite. Or why is Mrs. Jones wearing that hat? Or I don't really like that sermon. That is not true. That's not accurate. They all went to the same church. They all spent an hour together, and yet they come out with different experiences. So I like to say there's the overview and the effect. Those astronauts you talked about, they had the overview. They saw the Earth from a distance, but how it was processed was depended on who they were, their background, what they thought was important, and so on.
Yeah.
Right.
If you say to them, I think you're in your head too much, or get out of your, first of all, they deny it. Uh,
Yeah.
and then they might say, what the hell are you talking about? I'm in my head all the time. It's, I don't know a better language to use, but um, it's kind of like at one point I was getting so many proposals to be on the space show, and I had a scientific and engineering committee maybe 20, 15, 20 years ago. and they reviewed all these and they kept saying flake, 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 don't put them on the shelf, flake, flake, they're violating this, and this. So I thought some of them were really fun. So I was going to establish one program a month and call it the Flake Night. The problem is no one would be willing to be on the Flake Night because no one thinks that they're a flake or
So that
sees their concepts as a flake. So that idea was a real quick bust. Um, and
well,
many of them were resentful that I was inviting them for the flake night. But people don't see ourselves in the same light that maybe
Yeah.
others do, for sure.
Well,
Pablo, before we sign off, what's the physical process to go support Frank going to space?
Yeah, it's straightforward. You just go to a website, so moondao.com/overview, and it's a web page where you can essentially contribute to Frank's mission. Or well, it's called Go to Space with Frank White, as we really want people to participate and be part of the competition if they'd like to. They don't have to, but if they'd like to, they can compete for that other seat. You can contribute with just an email and a regular card. So debit card works just fine. We don't assume any knowledge of cryptocurrency or digital assets or anything like that. We don't want people to burden themselves with any of that. So you just show up, put in your email, type in a debit card, and you can contribute directly.
So you put in $100 and it'll be charged as a dollar amount. You don't have to worry about converting it to a blockchain currency or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then
Yep.
you get it back if Frank doesn't go. Is that correct? If the
Got
mission
it.
doesn't happen.
If the
mm.
mission doesn't happen, then we'll refund the yeah, basically everyone who contributed. So
So at this point, it's not going to fly for another 2 years, I presume, Blue. So we are still talking about maybe waiting for
He's
another
got a
2 years.
30-day timeline on it, he said earlier.
Virgin Galactic has talked about starting to fly at the end of this year again.
Oh, really? I see.
I don't know if they will, but they have a backlog of 600 paid customers. So,
Mm.
uh, however, they have moved people up for various reasons in the past. And so,
Hmm.
you know,
Okay.
it's possible it could happen sooner. Um,
Okay.
I'm ready. I could go today or tomorrow.
I'd be happy to contribute actually.
Okay, thank you.
Uh,
Yeah, if anybody wants to contribute, really appreciate it. There's just, David, if I know we're closing, there are two things I want to say, if I could. Um, so one thing is I'm grateful to MoonDAO for sponsoring me, and MoonDAO's putting in a lot of effort for this. And I'm grateful to everybody who's contributing. But I want everybody to know I'm not taking this for granted. I'm not saying I let Pablo say nobody deserves it more than me. I don't say that. I'm working hard to make this happen, and I'm not assuming that it'll happen just because I want to go. But the other thing is, it would be the fulfillment of a lifelong ambition, and yet, what I really want to do is share the experience of the overview effect widely. The astronauts have wanted to talk to me because they want people to know what they saw and what
mm,
they felt. And Tracy Caldwell Dyson said, you don't go to space for yourself, you go for humanity. So, Pablo, I think we're already getting results because we've probably shared the overview effect with more people in 2 weeks. We might have shared more than I've shared in 40 years. I don't know. But there's material out there about this flight that's really become ubiquitous. So I really think we're succeeding in a significant way. And um, I really I hope it works out, but it will be for humanity as well as for Frank.
Any,
Yeah.
anyone else have a comment they want to offer?
I just have a quick comment, I guess, about why MoonDAO's kind of worked with Frank this long and why we think it's important for Frank to go. I think Frank has one of the better whys. So this question of why do we go to space? Why do we want to do this? And at least I personally resonate a lot with this idea of the sort of self-awareness of humanity, or the sort of shift in consciousness that we're experiencing as a result of going out into the cosmos, and what this is going to do to our civilization, how it's going to affect our civilization. And I think it's coming at a very important time. I mean, we talked about the sort of AI and whether or not an AI can experience the overview effect. It's a philosophical question, but it's relatively practical. Recently, Claude was used by the Chinese in order to do a cyber attack on the United States. So these AIs as tools, are going to be used by nations in order to affect and undermine each other, and they're extremely capable. So I think that we're witnessing an evolution in our capacities as a human species, and with that, I think we need to also evolve how we see one another and how we see ourselves. And I think that the overview effect can maybe produce some of these outcomes in people, so that we're using these new tools not to attack one another, but to expand ourselves into the cosmos, to see a brighter tomorrow, to inspire one another. I think these are very important whys for why we go to space.
So, Pablo, if somebody wanted to propose a mission, I don't know if that's the right word, or a project that said we're going to fly the leader of the Senate and the leader of the House to space for the overview effect. And of course, we don't know who they will be because we don't know when the flight will be. So they may or may not be the two guys that we got now. Could something like that be flown because you don't even know who they might be or if they would consent to go to space in the hopes that maybe they get something like the overview effect? Because I remember in your first book, Frank, you talked about the Saudi Arabian prince who said they ought to send up all the government leaders. I think it was him who suggested that. Would a project like that uh, actually take root, given all the unknowns as to who might be at the helm of the Senate and the House when the thing takes place?
Yeah, I think if it can be well articulated, and you can articulate the risks with that sort of project, it's really up to the community. So if they think it's a worthy thing to fund, we run a cycle every quarter where there's a deadline. I hope I'm getting this right. I think it's April 9th. It's coming up, and a bunch of people will submit proposals, and then the community will rank them essentially, or vote between them, and then we'll fund the top proposals. So if it can outcompete other ones, and people think that this is the right allocation of resources, then yeah, I mean,
Of
I
course, their
think.
security would have to allow them to fly to space. So
Mhm.
I don't know to
Yeah.
what degree that may or may not be an issue. Seems like a worthy goal to maybe get some different perspectives in congressional leadership in this country. But uh,
Yeah.
any other comments from anybody? Want to offer a closing comment or a
Well,
message?
I'll mention something that I have experienced weightlessness once in my life. When I was at 4 or 5, I climbed up a fairly tall ladder and lost my step and fell off. And afterwards, I said, well, it felt good going down, but the landing was that's.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not the same thing,
I didn't see the blackness of space.
Yeah. Yeah.
but you
Well,
did see stars.
You
I
I
just
you you
I
didn't see
just saw the
the
rock beside my head that I didn't hit, which is
you
fortunate.
didn't see the overview effect, but you did see the underview effect, I believe.
yeah. I do want to mention, David, it hasn't gotten any press, and I'm sorry about that because it's interesting. Move.org has a petition that says no one can be elected to office if they haven't experienced the overview effect. And that's a really interesting thing. I don't know how the petition is doing, but move.org, they do these petitions, which they then attempt to pass into law. Now, they didn't say how you would experience it. Maybe you could do it in virtual reality or something like that. Or maybe you could fall off a ladder. I don't know. But this idea, David, what I want to emphasize is the astronauts started telling me about this early on, that it would be great. Actually, they were talking about people from different countries going together. But this is a very fertile idea, and anyone who understands the whole concept of the overview effect tends to start thinking about that. So maybe you ought to propose it to MoonDAO and see if the community buys it.
Maybe the space show can formulate it and propose it as a space show proposal. If any
Yeah,
wants to pick it up when they hear the archives or from this group, we could work and see if we could come up with the right wording and how to propose it.
I would propose even David Livingston as the second person.
No,
okay.
I'm
Well,
claustrophobic and
so,
but probably they wouldn't give me health permits to do it given some of the crap going on in my life. But I would like to do a space show from space. So if I could go up and do a 4 minute segment live in space with the crew, I mean that's probably impossible because they probably all wouldn't consent to it. But that'd be a lot of fun.
I'd love to see that. I'll support you.
But
Pablo, sorry.
you got to get younger and well, I don't know. I was going to say younger and healthier people, but older people bring a certain wisdom and experience and
Yeah.
perspective that I find younger people totally devoid of. So
These days, yeah.
these days,
Yeah.
you know, we were constructed in a way to go through these cycles, and so and it's always been a joke, and in poetry and everything else that with the age comes the wisdom. Why don't you get the wisdom when you're 40 years old or something like that? We're not built and wired that way, so I can't answer that question. But
Right.
Well, they do say that wisdom is wasted on the older people.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well,
Frank and Pablo, I want to thank you for helping me put this together at the last minute. And Frank, I hope you get to go off and you'll keep us posted. When your fifth copy comes out, let me know because I'd love to feature you back on that,
yeah,
especially with the suborbitals. And
right.
Pablo, when you have some interesting projects that you think we'd like to cover and address now that we know who you are and where you are and you know where we are, let me know because I think it's a fabulous program that you have running and I'm glad to learn about it.
Yeah.
Any other commentary from anyone? Otherwise, I wish everyone a great, happy, successful, safe weekend. Keep looking up and you can't really tell that the star is 4.5 light years away or 20 light years away, can you?
No,
So it's too bad we can't kind of perceive that. But I guess we can perceive dimness, but I can't tell which one is closer or not closer.
Well, the Drake equation says that a star is born every day, once a day. So once a day, year or once a day, I don't remember too well.
So everyone, Joel Sarcell is with us on Sunday and Jason Andrews Tuesday. Everybody have a great, safe weekend. Keep looking up. Thanks again to Frank and Pablo and to Marshall and Phil and Dallas, who's no longer with us, and John Hunt and John Jossie. Goodbye, everybody from the Space Show.
thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank you.
you.